yourselves a run from Cabool, Missouri, over to the stockyards in Guymon, Oklahoma. The trip is about 597 miles, so this isn't going to be one of those quick 20-minute runs. When we grab something, hammer down, we're already backing into the chutes. We've got some road ahead of us, and I figured this would be the perfect run to start something a little bit different. Instead of me just sitting here driving for 40 minutes, we're going to talk trucking, cattle hauling, things happening in the industry, some regulations that are changing, and some history about where we're coming from and where we're going. Probably whatever else comes to mind between here and Guymon. So grab a coffee, grab a drink, turn the volume up, and let's get this 389 moving. Alright, 50,715 pounds of Holstein behind us today. Livestock is one of those loads where, if you think about it, you're not just pulling freight. Your freight is standing up back there. It moves. It reacts to every little thing that you do. You don't want to be the guy standing on the brakes every 5 minutes. You don't want to dive into a corner and throw that cattle or load into the trailer against one side or another. You've got a smooth throttle, smooth braking. Give yourself room, look farther down the road, which really is good advice, whether you got cattle behind you or 50,000 pounds of steel. We've got some weight back there today, so when we get into a grade, you're going to hear this old Pete dig in. And when we come back down the other side, you're going to hear that Jake brake doing what a Jake brake is supposed to do. And that's half the reason many drive their trucks. The louder the Jake, the better. Now, before this road popped up, some of you probably had the same question I did. Where exactly is Cabool? It's down in southern Missouri and Texas County, right in the Ozarks. Small town. Population was just under 2,000 in the 2020 census. And here's something I think is pretty wild. The name Cabool is actually connected to Cabool, Afghanistan. Different spelling, but it's actually connected. The town was originally known as Cedar Bluff, and the local history says the Cabool name came along during the railroad days of the 1800s. Cabool sits around the intersection of US 60 and US 63. Despite being a small town, it's sitting in a pretty useful transportation spot. And historically, this whole area has been tied heavily to agriculture, dairy country, livestock, timber back in the early days. Basically, exactly the kind of place where you see a cattle wagon rolling down the road, and it makes sense. Now, picking up cattle out of this agricultural part of Missouri and running them toward the Oklahoma Panhandle feels believable. That's what we're going to do today. Outside trucking probably don't know. Livestock haulers have the special federal hours of service provision. Normally everybody hears about the 11-hour driving rule, right? 14-hour window, ELD and all of that. But agriculture gets a little bit more complicated. FMCSA has an agricultural commodity exemption covering transportation within 100 So portions of that trip close to the source and close to the final livestock destination can be treated differently from a normal dry van load. Once you're outside the applicable exemption though, that's when the hours of service rules come back into play. And that's why when somebody says, oh, livestock guys, they don't have to run hogs, that's way too simple. There are exemptions, but there are boundaries and conditions attached to those. And this is one of those areas where knowing the actual rule matters a lot more than knowing what somebody told you over the CV 20 years ago. There's also another livestock transportation law that's been around in one form or another for an insanely long time. The 28-hour law. It all goes way back to the 19th century. The basic idea is that livestock being transported interstate generally can't stay confined for more than 28 consecutive hours without being unloaded for feed, water, and rest, right? The required rest period is at least 5 consecutive hours. There are exemptions, and the law allows an extension to 36 hours under certain circumstances if it's requested in writing. But think about that for a second. We're sitting here in a modern Peterbilt with GPS, air conditioning, air ride equipment, electronic logs, and everything else. And we're still dealing with a livestock transportation concept that traces its roots back to 1873. Trucking changes. Some parts of it change really, really slow. Livestock hauling is one of those corners of trucking that I've always thought has its own culture. Those trucks tend to have the look, big stacks, lights everywhere, clean trucks, long wheelbases, and a lot of those trucks are always Peterbilt 379s and 389s. And they're usually not afraid to let that truck make a little noise, right? Which is why I like my old 389. But behind all that chrome, there's actually a lot going on. You have to think about ventilation, weather, animal conditions, loading density, flooring, gates, weight distribution, and then how you're going to handle that truck. Think about a regular load. When you hit the brakes and your pallets don't suddenly decide they want to just take a walk forward. In some cases they do. The cattle can always reposition themselves. The weight inside the trailer isn't necessarily behaving like a dead load. That's why smooth inputs matter. Start slowing down earlier. Don't snap that wheel. You can have 1,000 horsepower and still drive smoothly. Actually, if you know what you're doing, that's probably the better flex. So let's talk about what's happening in the actual cattle industry right now. This is where our trip lines up with some pretty big stories. The USDA put out mid-year cattle numbers in July. As of July 1st of this year, 2026, the United States had about 92 million cattle and calves on farms. Beef cows were around 28.5 million. That was about 1% from the year before. And this 2026 calf drop was estimated about 32.5 million head, down about 2%. Meanwhile, cattle on feed were around 13.2 million head, which is actually up about 2%. So you basically got a situation where the supply picture is still pretty tight, and when cattle supplies get tight, that doesn't stop with the rancher. That moves through the whole chain. You gotta think feedlots, livestock haulers, processors, distributors, grocery stores, restaurants, and eventually the person standing at the meat counter wondering why the steak cost what it cost. And that's the thing about trucking. You can take almost any trailer you see going down the highway, follow it into some bigger economic story. And that cattle pot isn't just cows, it's agriculture. It's fuel, it's feed, commodity prices, labor, food production, transportation, retail. It's all connected together, and the trucking sitting right in the middle of it. And we're going to take a little pause. We're going to drive a little bit, and then we'll get back to the stories here momentarily. being shut down because of concerns about New World screwworm. Now, if you've ever heard of screwworm or never heard of it, it's a parasitic fly, and it's seriously an animal health problem. USDA has been working with Mexico on surveillance, inspection, and control measures. So Douglas reopened the cattle traffic on August 24th, just a couple days ago. And this isn't one of those stories that only matters to some government office somewhere. The cross-border cattle movement directly affects ranchers, feedlots, cattle supply, and eventually transportation demand. The first reopening is being done in phases with inspections on animals coming across, and the USDA can change the timeline if the animal health risk changes. So that's absolutely something worth keeping an eye on if you're involved in livestock or even agriculture. It also shows you how quickly freight patterns can change. One border crossing closes, and suddenly cattle that would have moved one direction doesn't anymore. The rates can change, supply changes, equipment gets repositioned, then the crossing opens again and the whole network starts adjusting all over again. And that's logistics for you. Most people never see it. Truckers live inside of it. Trucking news for a minute. If you're running commercially, here's one that's actually worth checking. The FMCSA removed another 5 electronic logging devices from its registered ELD list on August 6th. Those are Moonlight, HGRS, Highest, Truck Ford, and Sparkle. If a carrier is using any one of those, FMCSA says they need to move away from it and replace it with a compliant registered device by October 6th of 2026. That's just a couple of days. Until that deadline, there are temporary instructions involving paper logs or logging software, and after that deadline, continuing the use of a revoked device can become an hours of service compliance problem. And that brings up something important. Just because somebody sells an ELD doesn't automatically mean that thing stays approved forever. FMCSA, the big government, maintains a registered device list and devices that can get removed at any time. So if you own a trucking company, that's one page I'd definitely have somebody checking regularly, because finding out that your ELD got revoked during a roadside inspection would be a pretty terrible way to start your morning. Subject this year has been non-domestic CDLs. FMCSA finalized new restrictions in 2026. The rule limits who can qualify for a non-domestic commercial learner's permit, or CDL. And under this new framework, eligibility for foreign applicants is tied to specific verifiable employment-based immigration statuses. That final rule took effect March 16th of 2026. Yeah, I'm not getting into politics. That's not what we're doing here, but if we're talking trucking, that's a legitimate industry change and is worth knowing about, especially for carriers and drivers, because licensing requirements aren't some little paperwork issue. If the credential isn't valid, everything downstream becomes a problem. Driver, carrier, insurance, load inspection, and all of it. And here's one that's even newer as well. The FMCSA published a proposed rule in August dealing with English language proficiency and out-of-service criteria for commercial drivers. Important word is proposed. Now, you and I, and most of us should know there's a difference between something that is being proposed and something already being a final regulation. English proficiency requirement itself isn't new. CDL drivers have long had federal requirements involving the ability to communicate social media, as we all know it is terrible, about turning all 5 of those into new law starts tomorrow. Do yourself a favor and go read the actual FMCSA page. Take 5 minutes, it saves a lot of arguing between all of us. Now, here's another thing I've been watching. The FMCSA, once again, has been working on 2 hours of service pilot concepts. Number 1 is called the flexible sleeper berth, I think is what it's called. The other is split duty period. So right now, drivers already have certain sleeper berth split options. What the FMCSA is studying includes possible 6-4 and 5-5 splits. And the split duty concept is looking at whether participating drivers could pause that 14-hour duty window for somewhere between 30 minutes and 3 hours. Now that's big, that's interesting. Because one of the biggest complaints about hours of service isn't always the total number of hours, it's the clock. You can be sitting somewhere doing absolutely nothing, waiting on a dock, waiting on paperwork, waiting on somebody who said, we'll have you out in 20 minutes. And then 3 hours ago, or 3 hours come by, meanwhile your clock doesn't even care, right? We've all been there, we've done that. So the question behind these pilots is whether you can give drivers more flexibility without increasing fatigue and hurting safety. And I think that's the right question to ask. Not, how do we make drivers stay awake longer, but can we stop wasting the hours they're already allowed to work? Those are 2 different things. And as far as right now is concerned, these are pilots and research, not a blanket of new hours of service rule everybody can slowly start using. So don't be out there thinking that's intact right now. That's another distinction that we need to be remembering, and also look up and wait for it and research. So while we're talking quietly of life stuff, truck parking is finally getting some serious attention. DOT, Department of Transportation, set aside a dedicated 2026 funding track aimed at commercial motor vehicle parking. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars being directed toward the parking problem through federal infrastructure programs. It's going to be huge. And everybody who's driving a current truck will tell you this isn't some minor convenience issue. Your clock is running down, you're tired, you're legally supposed to stop, and every truck stop for the next 50 miles is packed. We've all been there and done that too, where you try to get rest and you just can't find a spot to park. Now you've got a driver being told by one regulation you need to stop driving, and being told by reality, good luck finding somewhere to stop. That's the problem, and building actual parking spaces is one of those solutions that isn't very glamorous, unfortunately. Nobody's making a movie about a new truck parking lot, but let's give a driver a safe place to shut down at 10 o'clock at night, and I guarantee that driver cares. Now we're starting to get closer to Guymon now, and I want to talk about a town that makes sense for this load. Guymon absolutely does, and is the county seat of Texas County, Oklahoma. Right up there in the Panhandle, population was just under 13,000 in 2020 census. And agriculture has shaped this place for a long time. The cattle, the grain, the feedlots, then you had even natural gas. And later, a huge pork industry moved into the area as well. Guymon area started seeing major cattle feedlot development around about 1960s, and that helped bring meatpacking into this area. And here's another thing about Guymon. This part of Oklahoma got absolutely hammered during the Dust Bowl, and one of the historic Black Sunday dust storms in April of 1935 hit this region. Try to imagine being out here before modern highways, before GPS and before radar on your phone, and you see one of those walls of dust coming towards you. Today, Guymon's location makes it a transportation hub in the Panhandle, and that agriculture isn't just history either. There are still commercial feed yards operating around Texas County today. So cattle and trucks are very much important part of the modern landscape up here. And this right here is why I love doing these longer drives. Run 90 miles an hour, blow through every town, make your delivery, grab another one, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it's better to slow the whole thing down, turn the navigation listen to that engine roar, and just drive. Start noticing the terrain, the little towns, the farms, the road changing underneath you. And especially on a run like this where you're leaving the Ozarks and working your way toward the open country of the Oklahoma Panhandle. That's almost the whole point for me. It's really not about the delivery. It's everything between the pickup and the receiver. And if on the mic becomes something we keep doing, that's what I want it to be. We'll talk trucks, we'll talk equipment, industry news, regulations, this style of video, let me